Make sure to like and subscribe if you agree that no veteran's service should ever be dismissed as a relic of the past, because what you're about to hear is not just a story about medals and memories, but about how quickly forgotten honor can rise when the world least expects it. It didn't begin on a battlefield or with the echo of marching boots. It began in a cramped government office, the kind with beige walls and flickering fluorescent lights that hummed endlessly overhead, the kind of place where time seemed to drag its heels like a weary old clerk. Behind one of those desks sat Elena Torres, 28 years old, her hair tied in a loose bun, her cardigan sleeves pulled down against the chill of the AC. To anyone passing by, she was just another young woman shuffling papers, answering emails, keeping her head down in a place where ambition went to die in filing cabinets. Her coworkers knew her as Quiet Elena, polite enough, dependable enough, but hardly memorable. They didn't know about the missions that still haunted her dreams, or the name that once thundered through comms when the stakes were higher than quarterly reports. On that gray Tuesday afternoon, while the rest of the office pretended to be busy with spreadsheets and lukewarm coffee, Elena reached for the small wooden box tucked against the far corner of her desk shelf, the one she rarely opened but never left behind. She set it down carefully, as if even its weight could stir something unspoken, and with a slow breath, she lifted the lid. Inside, rows of medals glinted faintly under the weak office light, their surfaces dulled by dust, but their meanings sharper than any line item on her resume. She ran a cloth over the first, a bronze star whose ribbon had frayed at the edges from years of storage, and for a moment, she wasn't in that office anymore. She was back in Afghanistan, the desert air biting at her face as she guided civilians to safety under a sky lit with tracer fire. She blinked and looked away, pulling herself back into the monotony of paperwork and murmured conversations around her. But as her fingers moved over each medal, memory after memory surged forward. The rescue helicopter swaying violently during a hurricane relief mission, her hands gripping the harness of a child she refused to let slip into the water. The night her unit pushed through a collapsed building to pull out survivors after an earthquake overseas. The classified op that had earned her a medal signed off by a general himself. The one she kept slightly apart from the others, because even now, years later, she wasn't sure how much she could ever say about it. Her coworkers had seen the box before, of course, but only in passing, and only ever as a curiosity. A few had snickered quietly, whispering that she must have ordered them online as decoration, or inherited them from some distant relative she liked to brag about. One even asked outright once, half joking, if she got those at a pawn shop. Elena had just smiled faintly, not bothering to answer. It wasn't worth explaining, not in this place. It wasn't that she was ashamed, far from it, but explaining those medals to people who thought bravery was speaking up in a meeting felt like trying to describe fire to someone who'd only ever seen a matchstick. And so she stayed quiet, day after day, letting the medals gather dust just like her spirit seemed to, resigning herself to the idea that maybe her best years, her most meaningful days, had already passed before she'd even turned 30. At 28, she was supposed to feel alive, chasing dreams, building her future. Instead, she sat in a cubicle under the hum of lights, her medals hidden in plain sight, her past life reduced to a secret she kept polishing in silence. The office carried on around her, oblivious. Phones rang. Someone laughed too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny. The copier jammed, again. All the while, Elena traced her fingers along the edge of that letter in the box, the one with the general's signature, the ink slightly faded but still commanding. She remembered the weight of his hand on her shoulder when he gave it to her, the rare softness in his voice when he told her she'd done something that mattered far beyond the battlefield. She remembered thinking that moment would carry her for a lifetime, that no matter where she went, she'd never doubt her worth again. But life has a cruel way of shrinking glory into routine, of letting extraordinary stories get buried under ordinary days. And so she sat, wiping at the medals with slow, deliberate care, as if polishing them could keep her past from vanishing completely. If anyone had been paying attention, they might have noticed the way her jaw tightened, the way her eyes grew distant, the way her breathing slowed as she held the medals one by one. But no one noticed. No one cared. To them, she was just Elena, the dependable admin, The quiet girl in her late 20s whose biggest battles must have been office deadlines. The truth sat inches from their eyes, gleaming softly in the light, and yet they couldn't see it. Elena had stopped expecting them to. Still, as the rain began to lash harder against the windows, the sound a steady drumbeat against the glass, something stirred inside her. It wasn't pride exactly, nor was it anger. It was something heavier, something that whispered of unfinished business. She looked at her reflection faintly mirrored in the polished surface of a medal and saw the soldier she used to be staring back at her. The one who could still hear the call sign she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Falcon Prism. She swallowed, setting the medal down carefully, almost reverently. She didn't know why, but it felt different today. The box didn't feel like just a keepsake anymore. It felt like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. And though she couldn't see it yet, though no one in that room could possibly imagine it, the hour was coming when the quiet act of dusting off those medals would mark the end of just Elena forever. Because medals don't exist to gather dust. They exist to remind the world what kind of fire lives behind ordinary faces. And before the day was done, someone was going to shout words that would split her life in two once again. Falcon Prism, suit up now. The first sign that something was wrong came not from outside, but from the silence that fell inside the office. A silence so sharp it sliced through the monotone hum of printers and keyboards. It began with the buzz of an emergency alert flashing across computer screens, red banners that no one had ever seen in real life except during the quarterly drills they all rolled their eyes at. Phones began to ring in rapid succession, not the gentle pings of internal calls, but the shrill, urgent tones of direct lines from outside agencies. People glanced at one another nervously, whispering, shrugging, reaching for explanations that never came. Elena looked up from her medals, still half polished on her desk, and noticed how the rain outside had turned into a pounding storm, streaking down the glass, so hard it seemed to blur the world beyond. Then the alarms hit. Low, vibrating sirens echoing through the building's intercom, rattling pins in their holders, setting hearts racing. A security officer ran down the corridor, his voice sharp, ordering everyone to stay put. But the panic was already rising. Someone mentioned a cyber breach. Someone else whispered about coordinated attacks on the city's grid. No one had answers. Only speculation that grew louder with every unanswered phone call and every flicker of the office lights. For a moment, Elena sat still, hands folded on the box of medals, eyes scanning the chaos around her. She had seen panic before, but not like this. Not among people untrained to handle it. People whose greatest worry yesterday was whether the vending machine was out of chips. Their fear filled the air like static. She could feel it pricking at her skin, pulling her back into instincts she hadn't used in years. Her pulse slowed, not quickened, the way it always had when crisis struck, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget. She wasn't built for spreadsheets. She was built for storms. Across the room, her division lead burst in, face pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold air conditioning. He barked orders at the supervisors, demanding immediate reports, secure lines, cross-checks with Central Command. Half the office froze, unsure how to process the raw urgency in his voice. Elena watched, her expression unreadable, as he scanned the room with frantic eyes. He wasn't looking for answers. He was looking for capability. And then, suddenly, he found her. His gaze landed on the medals still sitting on her desk, the one she hadn't had time to tuck away when the sirens began. For a second, confusion rippled across his face, then recognition, then something close to relief. He straightened, shoulders stiffening, his voice rising above the noise as he shouted words that made the entire office fall silent. "Falcon Prism," he barked, the name ricocheting across the cubicles like a gunshot. "Suit up now." The room froze. Every whisper died instantly. Heads turned, eyes wide, mouths half open in disbelief. Falcon Prism? That couldn't be. Falcon Prism was a name they'd heard in rumors, in half-buried stories about a classified unit. A soldier who'd pulled off operations people thought were impossible. And yet the call sign had been thrown directly at Elena, the quiet, 28-year-old woman they'd ignored for months. Elena herself felt the word slam into her chest like a jolt of electricity. It had been years since anyone had spoken that name aloud. For a heartbeat, she was back in the desert, back in the roar of helicopters, back in the unshakable rhythm of command. Her body tensed, her breathing shifted, and though she hadn't moved, every part of her posture changed. The office girl they thought they knew was gone. Her coworkers stared, some in shock, some in skepticism, some with dawning horror at how little they had understood about the person sitting among them all this time. One young man muttered under his breath, "No way," but his voice trembled, betraying that he already knew the truth. Elena rose slowly from her chair, the box of medals still on her desk, her eyes steady on the division lead. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. His words had carried all the explanation she required. Something had gone horribly wrong out there, something big enough to require Falcon Prism. The call sign wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't nostalgia. It was an activation. Her blood ran hot with purpose she hadn't felt in years, and for the first time in a long time, she stood taller than the walls around her. The lead tossed a secure keycard her way, one that opened restricted areas she hadn't set foot in since leaving active service. She caught it without flinching, the movement crisp, practiced, automatic. It was muscle memory, the kind that doesn't die with age or time. As she strode toward the door, whispers followed her, disbelief rippling through the room like aftershocks of an earthquake. She was just, "No, that can't be. Did he really say Falcon Prism?" But Elena didn't turn, didn't explain, didn't acknowledge their confusion. She didn't need to. The medal she left on her desk spoke louder than any words could. In that moment, she wasn't Elena Torres, admin clerk, 28 and forgotten. She was Falcon Prism, the operative who'd carried lives in her hands, who'd earned the trust of generals, who had once been called upon to save what others couldn't. The storm outside raged harder, thunder shaking the glass, and as the door closed behind her, the air in the office felt emptier, heavier. Those who had laughed at her medals now sat in silence, realizing they had never known the truth of the person they worked beside. Down the hall, Elena moved quickly, the card unlocking a door to the restricted wing where emergency gear lay waiting, dusty from disuse. She pulled the locker open, the smell of metal and oil hitting her like an old song. Inside hung her tactical vest, her boots, her helmet, all tagged with the name she thought she'd retired. She touched the vest, fingers tightening over the fabric, and for a moment, she saw the faces of her old unit, the ones who had called her Falcon Prism with trust in their voices. Some were gone now. Some were scattered across the country, living new lives like she'd tried to. But here, in this moment, their echoes surrounded her. She dressed quickly, efficiently, her body remembering the motions faster than her mind could keep up. Each strap tightened was another layer of her old self returning. Each buckle fastened was a piece of her past aligning with her present. By the time she stood fully geared, her reflection in the locker's metal surface was no longer that of a tired office worker. It was a soldier, ready, sharp, unflinching. Behind her, the division lead appeared, his face still drawn with urgency, but steadier now that she was no longer hidden in plain sight. "We need you," he said simply, the weight of the city in his voice. Elena gave a single nod, no questions, no hesitation. Because when the call came, when the storm finally demanded her, there was no room for doubt. Falcon Prism had been called back into the light. The rain outside had turned into a full storm by the time Elena stepped out of the restricted wing, her boots striking the tile with a confidence that erased every trace of the quiet office clerk she had once been. Falcon Prism had returned, not in memory but in flesh, her vest strapped tight, her helmet clipped beneath her arm, her eyes lit with a focus so sharp it cut through the chaos like a blade. The division lead walked at her side, briefing her in short, clipped bursts. The city's defense grid was under coordinated cyber-physical attack, the kind of strike designed to cripple power, communications, even the airspace itself. Drones had already gone offline in clusters, and rumors of ground infiltration were coming in unconfirmed but urgent. The usual analysts couldn't handle it. It required someone who could think like a soldier, like a strategist, someone who had stood in storms and still known how to move. Elena listened, absorbing every detail without flinching, her mind already building patterns, contingencies, strategies the way it once had in war zones. By the time they reached the operations command center, she had already shed the last remnants of doubt. She strode into the room and the chatter stopped instantly. Officers and analysts alike turning to stare at the young woman in her late 20s who carried herself with the gravity of someone twice her age. At her workstation, she synced her old credentials, long thought inactive but instantly recognized by the system, and within seconds, the screens lit up with classified feeds she hadn't accessed since her last deployment. It was as if the years behind a desk had melted away, and she was right back in the rhythm of command. Orders rolled off her tongue like muscle memory. Redirect power to Sector 3. Isolate the compromised subnet. Prepare manual overrides for drone relays. Her voice was steady, unyielding, and the room obeyed. As the crisis escalated, Elena moved like the eye of the storm, calm but fierce, coordinating teams both in cyberspace and on the ground. When a strike team reported being pinned down near the city's east perimeter, she didn't hesitate. She grabbed a headset, patched in directly, and began guiding them out with the precision of someone who had lived those scenarios herself. Her words were sharp, clipped, but carried a steadiness that cut through fear. 2 clicks east. Stay low. You've got cover behind the service trucks. Keep moving on my count. 3, 2, 1, go. She could almost see the relief in their breaths as they followed her commands, lives steadying under her guidance. Every decision, every instinct reminded her that this was what she had been built for. Not the silence of office walls, not the dismissal of co-workers who never knew her, but the immediacy of crisis, the necessity of courage. Around her, the division lead washed with a mix of awe and vindication. Calling her back had been a gamble, but in minutes, it had proven the only right choice. Hours passed like minutes as Elena orchestrated the response, blending tactical knowledge with cyber expertise in a way few others could. She pulled on every scrap of training, every lesson her years in the field had taught her, her youth an advantage now, her reflexes quick, her stamina unbroken. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, but in both, she found her rhythm, leading not with speeches but with action. When a secondary breach threatened the hospital grid, she rerouted systems manually, fingers flying across the controls, saving countless lives without ever leaving the command center. When enemy drones breached the outer perimeter, she suited up again, this time physically joining the strike team, boots splashing through the flooded streets as lightning tore across the sky. She moved with her rifle steady, her vest heavy but familiar, leading a squad half her age through corridors they would have never survived without her. For every shadow of doubt she had felt in that office, every pang of irrelevance she had endured dusting off her medals, she now carved proof into the night. Falcon Prism was not a story of the past. She was the present. She was the answer. By dawn, the city was stabilizing. The grid was secured, the breaches sealed, the attackers routed. Smoke still curled above certain rooftops, and the air reeked of rain and burned circuitry, but the worst had passed. Elena stood on the rooftop of the command center, helmet tucked under her arm, rain washing over her face as the first light broke through the storm. She was exhausted, her muscles trembling from strain, but in her chest burned something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. She looked down at the medals she had reattached to her vest before stepping into the field, each one gleaming with a clarity they hadn't had in that dusty office. They weren't relics, they weren't props, they were promises fulfilled, markers of a life still alive, still capable of answering when the world called. Behind her, footsteps approached. They was the division lead, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. "We couldn't have done this without you," he said simply. Elena turned, meeting his eyes, and for the first time, allowed herself a small, tired smile. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need applause. All she needed was this: the knowledge that when the call had come, she had answered. Back in the office later, the transformation was undeniable. The coworkers who had once snickered at her medals now looked at her with wide eyes. Whispers hushed in her presence, respect blooming where ignorance had reigned. She didn't rub it in, didn't boast, didn't even explain. She simply placed the box of medals back on her shelf, this time polished, gleaming, unapologetically visible. She sat at her desk, calm, composed, and though the room buzzed with new energy, she felt no need to join the chatter. Because she knew something they would never fully understand. She wasn't waiting for their validation. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was Falcon Prism, 28 years old, not washed up, not forgotten, but alive and ready, her past not a memory, but a foundation for everything still to come. And though the storm had passed, she knew this was not the last time the call would come. The medals weren't the end of her story. They were the beginning of another chapter. And when the world needed her again, she would rise without hesitation, because some names don't fade with time. They wait, patient and steady, until the moment they're called back into the light.